I've been an organizer for 10 years now. There's a lot of things that I've learned. And last year, I was organizing with some newer folks in my community. Folks were taking notes on Google Drive. Are you taking notes on a platform that could be subpoenaed or has a history of being subpoenaed? These folks were communicating with a lawyer about core, vital details about the direct action. And those details eventually ended up with law enforcement. That instance taught me once again why security culture is necessary, how we each come to it with different levels of understanding based on the work that we believe that we're doing or based on the tactics that we believe that we're taking that can ensure that we will be safe in terms of how the state reacts. And what I want to ground this whole conversation around security culture in is that security culture isn't here to produce paranoia or to create division or to create this clickiness in any kind of environment. Security culture is there. It's a series of modes of behavior and tools that help you and your community be safe by not sharing unnecessary information with people, by being clear about what your roles are, and understanding if or how you plan to interact when questioned by the state, and how secure you keep your devices, your information, your technology. So I just want to start us there and really ground us in the fact that we are in a moment of rising fascism. We are in a moment of peeling back of due process. And that sheer reality just means that we have to do more to take care of each other, and security culture is one of the most vital ways we can do that, especially when you're trying to get more serious about that militant work. Do you think Luigi Mangione had security culture? Think about it.
Congratulations, you found the number. That means you're curious, reckless, or paying attention. Here's the situation. The Midwest collapsed after the third rail shutdown. Banks went digital only. Cops deputized into the feds. And someone burned down the telecom hub. Not us, but we're not mad about it. Now there's a perimeter around the Greenbelt. We call it the free zone. We grow, defend, and decide for ourselves. Before you ask to join, ask yourself this. Can you move without being seen? Can you speak without being heard? Can you organize without handing them a blueprint? If not, go study. Security culture is the only thing standing between our future and a cage. We've got 48 hours to meet the contact. Burn this cell phone. No second chances.
Let's dig into what security culture is. Security culture is about keeping each other safe, especially when organizing makes you a target. It's a shared set of habits, tools, and boundaries that activists and communities use to protect themselves from surveillance, infiltration, and repression by state or corporations. Think of it like this. Just like you lock your door at night or avoid sharing your passwords, security culture helps you decide what to share, how to communicate, and how to prepare if the state tries to criminalize you or your movement. I really want to ground us in the fact that what matters most with security culture is not the tools that you use. It's not about buying a VPN and buying a virtual machine and getting all these things, just dumping them onto your computer. It's about the modes of behavior that you use with these tools. It's about the shared practices that you and your friends have. If you and your friends are actively organizing and one or more of you have been identified by the state or an alt-right organization or even the news in a significant way, are you going to pull up to protest in the same way? If you're planning an action against a corporation that profits from war and has a lot of resources and has a history of doxing protesters, what kind of measures are you going to take before you get into that direct action? What kind of measures are you going to take before, during, and after? Modes of behavior and thoughts that can help you factor what you will and won't do in those situations where you aren't sure if you're in a situation where the state is watching or an infiltrator or an informant is in your midst. It's about protecting yourself from the ways that surveillance entraps activists and helps the state build cases. And some of this is what the state intrinsically does, and some of it is looking at more recent contexts that can help us inform how the state is reacting to movements today, or how the recent happenings can affect how the state is reacting to movements today. Meaning, like, we're going to be talking about J20. If folks don't remember, when the 2016 inauguration happened in the US, a shit ton of people were arrested, and there's a lot of parts of J20 that are really interesting to look at and dive into when we're thinking about security culture and how to keep each other safe.
When J. Edgar Hoover testified in Congress about the Black Panther Party, he said the Black Panther Party was the greatest threat to the internal security of America. And he was getting congressional approval that if this is the greatest threat, then you have to give me permission to handle this threat. And it's going to be a program that I'm not going to speak about in this congressional hearing, but those of you who are on these special committees are going to fund and allow me to do this thing called COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. And the thing to understand about the counterintelligence program is it wasn't just good old-fashioned police work. Let me put the Panthers under surveillance and go after, them if they're doing something wrong. It was counterintelligence. It was to destabilize. It was lies. It was phone calls. It was letters. It was agent provocateurs. It was undercover cops and FBI agents to destabilize the Panther Party, which leads to the Panther 21 case. But here's the important point to remember in all of this. J. Edgar Hoover hated the breakfast program more than he hated the self-defense program, more than he hated in those cities that were legal, where Panthers were patrolling the police with legally possessed rifles and shotguns and law books, because he understood the power of that kind of organizing. Mm-hmm. He understood radical history in some ways better than we do.
In this breakdown of security culture, the first step that we're going to talk about is risk assessment. So before you even do an action, before you go to a gathering, before you decide to go into a major chapter or season of organizing, you want to think of what risks are present, who you're going to be working with, and what kind of work you're going to be doing. Because it's both what you bring to the table and your life experiences and the risks that you have and how that leans into and affects the collective risk, the collective identity, and the collective course of action. For individual risk assessment, there's a few different ways that we can approach this. On the individual risk assessment, it's important to understand, so some of the things that you can think about in terms of who you are and what you're doing. Are you Black, brown, queer, trans, disabled? Are you any of the intersections of identities that are more typically surveyed by the state or targeted by the state? Do you have pending court cases, probation, or parole? If you have any of these, you might need to notify your PO about whether or not you're traveling. You might have to be worried about civil charges versus criminal charges. You might have to be worried about being doxxed and that information getting out and your public records being accessible in a certain way based on your previous interactions with the state and how that has been documented. Do you have a citizenship status that makes any kind of interaction with the state way more risky for you, meaning you could be deported or indefinitely detained? We've definitely seen countless instances of that in the last number of months with Trump being president, whether you are a citizen or not. Have you been watched online or followed in public? Look at the fact that the live streamer, Twitcher, Hassan Piker was recently detained by Border Patrol and questioned when he was coming back into the US about what he spoke about online, what kind of people he interviewed, basically being asked questions in order to incriminate himself to allow the state to assume that he has connections to terrorist organizations. Having a certain level of online visibility can be a certain level of risk and assessment. And what you're doing also matters as well. Are you doing much more militant direct action that involves blockades or tree sits or intervention, more antagonistic forms of direct action? Because these are modes of direct action where you're usually going into a space that is usually highly surveyed. License plates can be read through various forms of surveillance, facial recognition, drones. And in these movements, the state tends to compile a list of folks that they want to survey through a variety of means and potentially give trumped up charges later on. So protecting your identity in terms of what you're doing can also be extremely useful. Are you doing jail support or mutual aid? These have been forms of direct action and community care that have been targeted in recent years, meaning the flyers, the zines, the financial transactions are up for state interpretation in terms of whether or not they're illegal, legal, criminal, or non-criminal, and whether or not they're allowed in terms of racketeering and other kind of trumped up charges that the state can rely on or resort to. And then are you supporting or are you in contact with high-risk groups? Are you in solidarity with movements that are experiencing high forms of surveillance? Have you been doing media work and interviewing folks that may have certain kinds of charges or political histories or histories in terms of their interaction with the carceral system? When the state is trying to power map, one of the ways that they will survey someone that they consider really important is by looking at the tangential people around them, meaning their assistant or their secretary or maybe their neighbor that they do a book club with or whatever it may be. The people that are around highly surveyed people are also a part of the state's mechanism of surveying that person, whether that means knocking on your door, whether that means sending you fake messages online, whether that means detaining you at a protest and asking you specific questions about specific people that you know. It can come up in a variety of ways. And some questions that can help guide you in your individual risk assessment are, how do my identities affect my exposure to state violence or repression? What kind of work am I doing and what kind of attention does it attract? Have I been surveilled, arrested, or targeted before? What is my threshold for risk? And how can I lower it while showing up in political and movement spaces? And then once we get into the next step, which is collective risk assessment, who are we and what are we doing collectively? What risks are we facing? What risks have we faced? And what risks could we face? I recently learned about intersectional threat modeling, but when we're thinking about risk, there's all sorts of risks. There's social risks, political risks, financial risks, technical risks, legal risks, familial risks. All of these are areas where you can analyze your assessment in terms of risk and threats on a personal or individual and collective level. Maybe you've had a long career in one particular area of organizing, like labor, and you have a lot of beef there, and you switch over to another lane. Can that beef open you up to people being swayed to be an informant against you based on the kind of political work that you're doing? First is when you're organizing together collectively, who is in the room, what kind of risks do you face, and how can those risks show up in the work that you're planning to do? If you are a bunch of people that have a variety of different economic means and all of you are collectively arrested at a protest, are the people that are more poor just not going to have lawyers and the people that are rich are going to have lawyers? Or is there some kind of collective understanding that mutual aid will be shared? Or will people fundraise together? Or will resources be distributed carefully, equally, in terms of how people plan to do an action? Do we have BIPOC people, undocumented people, disabled or high profile people in the room? Have people previously been targeted by police, ICE, or the state? What kind of organizing are you doing? Are you doing organizing that is legal, but maybe something about the administration is shifting, so this legal work is now increasingly becoming criminalized? Are you doing a direct action that hasn't been seen in your city or your region before? If it hasn't been seen or understood in your region, that can open it up to more state speculation and surveillance. Or are you doing a direct action that has been done time and time again, but it has a history and pattern of being really targeted, really brutalized, and really trumped up in terms of the charges? Is this action underground? Is it public facing? If it's something that's a little bit more spicy, you really want to understand who you're working with, what kind of past or histories that they have, and what kind of information you're sharing with each other on a need to know or not need to know basis. Because to me, the action is one of the most important things that should help dictate your security culture. It's both what you're planning to do and how the state is treating you, but I think one of the ways that you can see that folks are really inexperienced is that, one, they don't have any security culture at all, or they don't adapt their security culture to meet the current needs of the situation that they're in. And it feels really important to mention a case that I brought up in a previous video. If I remember what that video was, I'll link it up in the corner here. But the reason that collective risk assessment is so important is because anytime there's a shift or change in the legal status of any folks that you're working with, or any time that you're working in movement settings where there's a lot of different kinds of people passing through, collective risk assessment is important. Collective security culture is important. And what I mean here is that you need to be able to have a system of vouching for each other, assessing new people that are coming into your groups. And this doesn't mean interrogating people and questioning them and freaking them the fuck out. It means talking to a few of your people and being like, hey, how do you know this person? Where do you know them from? And the reason I mention this now is because there is a case from Cleveland, Ohio in 2011 where the FBI directed an informant to show up to an Occupy Cleveland demonstration. And for folks that don't know the Occupy movement, it's from the early 2010s. It was largely around economic disparity. It involved a lot of like occupations in different cities all around the world. And this informant attended a meeting, befriended a group of anarchists, and over the next 6 or 7 months, colluded with them and basically entrapped them in a number of ways. I mean, this informant suggested the idea that they use explosives and suggested potential targets, including the bridge. He also facilitated them getting materials that they thought were real explosives. And the kicker here is that this dude, this informant, was giving them work, like money, like fixing up places. And this is what I mean. If new people are entering your circles totally unchecked, and it's a period of time where there's a lot of social unrest, there are physical spaces in your city where people politically gather, meeting someone there and then inviting them into your circle and then taking work from them and allowing them to plan like or propose vital parts of really fucking illegal shit. Cases like this show us where this can go wrong and how the state uses these situations as opportunities. So, total transparency isn't always great in settings when you're working with lots of different people and you never know who's watching, which is why the collective risk assessment is important. And a part of collective risk assessment is vouching. Back to the video. Some more questions for collective risk assessment. What are the potential risks or things that can go wrong? If someone is arrested or targeted or doxxed, could they lose their job? If someone is door knocked, do they have particularly sensitive information or documents that could shine a bad light onto the whole group? Are you in state subsidized housing and maybe being doxxed or targeted or surveyed or arrested would literally lead to you being houseless? And then another question for the collective is, are we aligned on our communication practices on boundaries? Do we have a clear understanding of what we only share privately with each other? Do we have a clear understanding of what we are allowed or feel cool to share with other people in terms of the action or the work that we're doing? What kind of communication tools are we using? Are we going to be texting about actions? Are we going to be using WhatsApp to text about actions because someone said that I heard it was encrypted? Are you using Signal? Are you using an encrypted email? Are you writing your direct action planning notes down and tearing that shit up and burning it after every meeting? Are you putting it on a flash drive that has various layers of encryption that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to access it? What kind of spaces are you meeting in? What kind of spaces are you talking about sensitive information in? I remember I was trying to collaborate with some people on a direct action and they wanted us to meet up at a cafe with all these other people there. What? And it was in a neighborhood I didn't even know. What? And some tangible practices that we can have in terms of collective risk assessment. One is the buddy system. So ensuring that no one moves alone at actions or at meetings. One thing that happened here locally in Central Ohio in 2020 was after protests, it was really fucking common for the jump out boys or the cops in the like unmarked white vans to pick people off after protests, arresting you while you're on your way to your car. Do you have a buddy? Do you need someone to walk with you when you're going to your car? Do you need a buddy to go with you to your house? The buddy system is so fucking important. I remember there was an action in 2020 where it was obviously around police and race. And I remember I was a part of this collective and we trusted these white allies to come and basically be our buddies in terms of if like the state violence got to a certain point. And I remember like all these white buddies scattered. I ended up running through this parking lot alone. I was like, what the hell? So the buddy system is important. Role delegation, having different roles for the direct action to help better curb the ways that state surveillance can happen, whether that be legal support, whether that be jail support, whether that be having legal observers there, whether that be having people that are assessing the crowd and figuring out whether or not there's weird people around at that direct action. Visible leadership shielding. So organizing the action in a way, having the action occur in a way, or even being amongst each other in a way where there isn't enough hierarchy for someone to be identified as the leader and to be picked off. Because if we look at the 60s and 70s, What did COINTELPRO do? And then just having periods of time where you literally go over your group norms and agreements. What are your shared practices around how you plan to meet up together? And how often do you reassess these norms and adjust them based on the realities of what you're dealing with? Really being clear on the need to know aspect of security culture and how this feeds into situational awareness. And I'll speak to this from my own life and background. I grew up in East Cleveland. I grew up in the hood. I was pretty sheltered. Having an undocumented family from an early age taught me some of the basics of security culture you need to know. And there was a period of time where my family knew to call my stepdad Uncle Joe on the phone. My family knew that we shouldn't be sharing all this information about this family member because of their citizenship status. And when I look at how my family worked to ensure that we could be safe and together, security culture was one of the clearest ways that we could do that. And that also meant understanding that people in our community might not have those same ethics, that you don't need to invite everyone into the spaces where there's need to know information. Because if you're trying to keep a social entity together, why would you allow potentially antagonistic forces to have very vital information around who you're working with, how you're moving, and what your plans are? The need to know and situational awareness is literally kind of a part of how I remember my family acting growing up. And then I think when I got into more protest settings, white people definitely have a different kind of situational awareness. People that grew up in safer hometowns or backgrounds, or maybe their family has more money, have a certain kind of situational awareness. Like, I know when I'm walking home, I'm checking behind me all the time. The fuck? But sometimes I literally see people leave their house and they're walking to their car and they're walking in such a way that they literally aren't looking at what's around them. And situational awareness can be so many things. Do you take the same route home? Do you understand whether or not there's new or strange people hanging out at a cafe or a place that you hang out at all the time? Are there certain kind of cars that are showing up in your neighborhood that you haven't seen before? Does your city have some kind of new contract with a certain kind of drone company? And so you're noticing more drones flying around. You're like, why is this drone in my neighborhood? What the fuck is going on? It's important to not be paranoid. It's important to be measured, practiced, and to understand if you're at a protest and you see that police have body cameras on and they're pointing them at the crowd and they're trying to document faces, are you going to cover up your face? Are you going to inform people around you that the cops are documenting people's faces? That's a consideration. Need to know can be so many things. It can be learning how to describe things in a way that's vague enough so that you can talk about certain things in public spaces. Knowing how to talk about things around certain kinds of people or what to redact. All of these are things that I think you learn over time. If you wouldn't share it in a court, why are you sharing it in a public setting where you don't know who the fuck is around you or who's listening? Period. Period. And situational awareness is, if you are a marginalized person and your body has ever been at risk on this land or in this country, you understand situational awareness. Women understand situational awareness because they have to in a lot of ways because of the patriarchy. Black people have to understand situational awareness because we're Black. And if you don't know whether or not there's cops around and people could be watching you, or if I'm going down south and I'm going into a fucking gas station and I didn't notice the Confederate flag outside, what the fuck do I look like? Like, do you get what I'm saying? Looking at state-sanctioned actors that could target protesters and folks, and also non-state actors, alt-right groups, militia groups, racists, bigots. You can almost tell where someone aligns ideologically based on their security culture. When I've known more progressives and liberals, they might not care as much that the cops are showing up to a protest in a certain way, or that the bike cops are flanking a certain area, or that there's people on the rooftops and there's drones and there's body cameras. But the further left you go, people might have different kinds of charges. People have faced different kinds of repression. And I do think in more far left movements, the situational awareness thing is important because people have literally been killed. People have died. And I don't mean to hyperbolize this, but I do think if we want to be serious about protecting ourselves and each other, situational awareness is literally one of the first things that you can begin to practice. Practice scanning the crowd and the protest in the area, looking at your entrances and exits. Practice knowing relatively how many people are there, who should be there, who is someone that isn't really expected to be there. Are there strange things around in the area that were not placed there by you or your folks? We're taking a break in this episode, and we're going to plug in an interview right here with a comrade you've seen in this series before. I want to make a quick mention that I include these interviews because these videos aren't your only resource, and I always find it helpful to hear from other people through their own words, in their own thoughts, in their own experiences. And maybe it's kind of me trying to model for you all. Go and talk to people. Ask them questions about this stuff. Talk to people you know that organize. Ask them about security culture, how they approach it, how they think about it. Don't ask them specifics about the work that they do, because that's against security culture. But you know what I mean? And yeah, enjoy this interview with the Sam.
I'm an activist and a housing organizer. I would define security culture as like a mode of habits and practices that are so ingrained and normalized in your everyday behavior that it becomes a culture to you, your friends, the community, the larger sphere of people working on different projects, that it allows you to stay safe from the eyes of the state, and it also suppresses the ability to be as paranoid. So it keeps everyone less in a mode of guessing. Maybe the basics for me would be used encrypted messaging platforms, research the companies that you're using to transfer data. Snitches get stitches. Be very aware about what you're talking about and who you're talking to. I think those are things that I feel like I always am trying to be very mindful of. Does this person need to know? Why? Why not? And that just applies with everything, but it also like decreases your paranoia. You shouldn't be just spreading your business all over the place. First, you have to understand the vulnerabilities. You have to understand the facets of vulnerability. So that's proximity to incarceration, proximity to the state. Are people using illegal substances? Are people have any like legal vulnerabilities, or do they actively have search warrants? Do they actively have like, are they getting swept in a matter of days? Are they going to get trespassed? Are they currently being trespassed? The list goes on. Is there a domestic violence issue? I mean, I know like a lot of domestic violence things require an immense amount of security culture because there's like a lot of stalking involved. And so you have to be very like tight with how you share information. Also with like people who have like active warrants out for their arrests, police are constantly looking for them and will ask you a lot of questions, and you have to be very tight with how you communicate. I mean, there's a big gradient of like people who are just like revolutionary radical anarchists or unhoused people who are shooting dope and have active warrants out for their arrest, all the way up into this person literally works for the city. In all of that spectrum, you have to be practicing principled security culture. I think that's like the point. You don't loosen your security culture based off of where you are in each space. You keep it principled in each space. For me personally, like when I feel the most insecure about security culture is when people are loose in one area and then very tight in the other. Like it doesn't make any sense. You get mugged. You get mugged, shot, stabbed. I mean, I've definitely had people pull knives out or guns out. And at that point, it's like, what is security culture? Like, it's like Signal's not going to protect you in those situations. So I feel like you have to be like, have a buddy. I mean, and part of security culture, I guess, like in housing is like know people in the communities that you're going into. Like be cognizant of like how you're entering into a space, how you're being perceived, you know, how you show up, how you move. Like those are all very tangible, real things. And if you're not very like aware, those things can really compile because people are watching you just as much as you're watching them. What I understood about security culture when I was first being introduced to it as opposed to now is when I was first introduced to it, I was doing things not with the full understanding of what I was reacting to. And because of that, I wasn't nearly as principled or had a clear idea of, like, when you don't know what to react to, you don't know how to use the tools. So you can be given all the tools, but it doesn't really make sense. So you could be using the tool in a completely wrong way, or you could be threat modeling in a way that doesn't even particularly make sense. The more you get an actual understanding of like the environment that you exist in, how to use the tools that you have, trying to understand the actual threats that exist and reacting to that, you gain a better understanding. So I think from the very beginning, I didn't really, like I was given a lot of tools like encrypted devices, VPNs, don't use your phone, yada, yada. I was doing it just based off of like an assumption, where now I understand the reasons why. Well, A is because you're not a lawyer. So you don't fully understand the law in the ways that a lawyer does. And cops are always like to use the information that you give them, regardless of what you say, against you in any way. So you shouldn't be like giving that up in the most strictest sense. On a mental health side, like even if you do know how to talk your way around stuff, you probably shouldn't. Just generally for your own mental health, because it will leave you guessing and kind of leave you in that state of paranoia, which kind of what I was talking about initially, which is like you should rely on a principle and not necessarily just off of intuition always, because I feel like, that can kind of dive you into the unknown. Your intuition can be manipulated. Like if someone's being super charismatic or nice or kind or saying something nice to you, that could lead you astray.
To go back to the need to know, a point that I really want to bring home is it's really important with need to know. Instead of defaulting to total transparency, we have to be strategic. We limit sensitive info like names, places, locations, plans, affiliations. We reduce the chance of harm if things go wrong, if we reduce the amount of sensitive information that's getting to people that don't need to have that sensitive information. Now that we've talked about some of these basic risk assessment steps, I want to give us some situations that these kind of risks might show up in. And this is going to give you time to respond or think about it in real time, what you would do in these situations and how you would react. Put on your imagination hat, and we're going to dive into some situations where you might have to practice security culture. Situation 1, imagine you are organizing a protest at a government building. The action is big, there are a lot of moving parts. You break the teams into smaller groups to manage different aspects of the protests. Let's say there's a banner team. There's another team that's going to do some scouting. They're going to figure out the entrances, exits, the basics of the location. There's going to be marshals. So there's going to be people that are making sure people in the crowd are safe, that they have water, that the march kind of has a route that doesn't leave certain kinds of folks behind. And then you're also going to have jail support. And let's say this is an action where you're doing a rally outside and you plan to march to City Hall and you want to do a series of conversations out front. And maybe things will get a little bit spicier where potentially there might be some kind of lockdown. This is the hypothetical situation that you should imagine yourself being in. And so you are on the scouting team. Before the action, someone from another team, let's say it's someone in the collective is like, I guess I never really understood, where exactly are we meeting up for this thing? In the situation, action environment that has the potential for arrest, only the scout team needs to know the exact location of the protest 24 hours ahead of the action. Everyone else, even those who will be actively involved, only need to know a general meetup point. The idea is to compartmentalize the details. This approach limits the amount of information that gets to people that don't necessarily need to know it. If it's 2 days before the action, instead of saying we're meeting at X location to block traffic, meaning you are both revealing the exact location that you're meeting and the plan of the course of action. Instead of revealing those two things, you limit the amount of sensitive information that someone has. And instead, you could say, folks are going to meet at the Starbucks downtown, and the scout team, 10 minutes before the action is supposed to start, will text you the location, the intersection that people will congregate at. If you tell someone 2 days before the specific location of the action and the plan to do something that might be a little riskier, you're literally opening up the action to have 48 hours of potentiality where someone will maybe share those details with their friends, that other person will share it with their other roommate, and maybe their roommate's dad is a cop. Who fucking knows? You can change the way you share information and still be forthcoming about the risk level that's happening at that action in your planning process and keep sensitive information to a minimum. And if you say that we're gonna meet at the Starbucks and the scouting team will send y'all the location 10 minutes before, one, you're congregating somewhere that is legal, safe, and visible to the public based on the needs and parameters of that action. And two, you are allowing there to be a minimal amount of time where very critical information about this particular action is going to be open and public knowledge to, let's say, the dozens of people that are going to be a part of this action. What if one of those dozens of people has an open case, they've been nudged into being an informant, and this is all because city council is trying to like open up some kind of new fucking fucked up contract related to like the environment or something. There are all sorts of situations that tells the state surveillance is more or less necessary. And then there's just going to be intrinsic ways that the state is going to survey information to find out the basics of what that action is and be there ahead of time. If you're putting the information for this kind of action on a Facebook page and all the information is out there, the state literally will just copy and paste that and they'll be there ahead of time and you won't be able to do what you want to do, hypothetically. So understand situation one. Please, please, please. Like the differences between these two things and how you say it, world of difference. You're at a radical reading group and someone approaches, it's someone new, they seem kind of cool, but immediately they say, hey, weren't you the person at that really cool pipeline lockdown action last March? Like, I think I saw your photo, like that was sick as fuck. And people in the reading group are like, huh? You were at a pipeline lockdown thingy. How do you respond? Option one could be, yeah, I was there and yeah, I met some really cool folks and there are a lot of people that got charges off of that. Like, it was really kind of fucking rad. Like, are you into that kind of stuff? Like, we should totally link up and talk about more. Is this the right option? No. Don't confirm previous militant direct action in a public setting to people that didn't know about it, to someone that you've never met before. No, 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 no. Don't do that. And granted, there are a variety of ways where someone might know, and some of it is both the push and pull of like, you don't want to come off as like standoffish to people, but you do want to set boundaries in a way that's clear and also will kind of get people off your trail. And this is case by case. But if someone you don't know is identifying you as someone that was a part of an action that you haven't shared with the people in that group, and you're like, what the fuck? It's something to think about. It's something to think about. Instead of being like, oh yeah, I was there, but I was only there for a little bit of time. You know, like it was a quick little thing. You're admitting that you were a part of that. Instead, you could say, oh, like I did hear about that. I think I saw some of that on the news. I'm glad folks organized around it, but it seemed really important, but I wasn't there. Why the fuck would you admit that you were there? What is the utility of admitting you were there? You'll find a comrade, you'll find a collaborator, you'll find a collaborator with someone who's gonna out your critical information in public around other people. And the reason that this matters is you don't want to assume that this person is a cop or a fed, but you don't want to be in the practice of sharing sensitive information about your organizing past around people in public spaces, especially with people you don't know, because that information can travel and or the person trying to inquire might have ulterior motives. And that can mean that this person is a cop. They could be a fed, they could be a journalist. It could be simply someone who's too curious. But regardless of which of those categories that person falls into, it's important that you set your boundaries around what kind of spicy behavior you're literally willing to let people know about. And I'll say this to this point. When I wrote my book, I was not writing everything I did. It will be wild for me to write everything I did. Some of it I wrote Journalistically, some of it I wrote with different kinds of language, but set your boundaries, honey. Set them, set them, set them, set them, set them. Now that we've looked at some situations where you might have to practice risk assessment in that moment or in that particular organizing environment, next I want to go into what I consider largely step 2 of security culture is analyzing and looking at and refining our communication practices.
People think of newspapers as institutions. That's not any kind of separate institution. It's just another organizer's tool.
The underground press challenged authority and questioned authority in an era when newspapers didn't do that.
We want to think about information control, avoiding discussions about sensitive activities, topics, events, especially in public or unsecured places. You're not going to talk about vital direct action details at the library or at the cafe or any public place where people who you don't know could be there or you're known to congregate and gather there a lot. And this matters because one of the primary ways that the state or state agents infiltrate movements is by intercepting sensitive conversations and information. And this can be through monitoring phone lines, hacking emails, or even listening in on public discussions without anyone being the wiser. The LA8 were a group of activists, I think in the 80s or 90s, who were targeted for a number of years by the state because of their pro-Palestinian organizing. And there is one particular, it was revealed later that like a Fed went to a talk that was by one of the LA8. And I think the talk was in Arabic, and the FBI agent later wrote in their file, like, I didn't understand what they were saying, but you could tell that since it was Arabic that it was obviously hostile. Are you fucking kidding me? No. No, 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 that's wild. Any conversation on unencrypted platforms like SMS, Facebook Messenger, or standard email is vulnerable to surveillance. This is because they can do a subpoena, they can do a FOIA. The state can force corporations to give information if these corporations have a history of handing out information. And if you are using more encrypted forms of technology, then there are that many more layers for the state to even begin to decrypt your information, whether it be passcodes or end-to-end encryption or virtual machines or whatever the fuck you want to call it. But if it's not encrypted, they could just talk to WhatsApp and be like, what's up? Give me this dude's information. And then all of your private messages and all of your contacts and all of your networks of people that you know is, even though phones are useful tools, they can be tapped or tracked. The fact that you can go to a protest and they have, what is it called, stingrays that literally intercept your phone signals and let them know who is or isn't there. If you're going to an action and you bring your phone and your biometrics unlock is on and you're zip tied in the back of the police van, all they got to do is hold your phone up and be like, all right, okay, like, oh, your roommate's calling. Should I answer it for you? No, you don't want that to happen either. Be careful about your phone. And we're learning this even more now with like traveling and borders and how the state is trying to like go through people's phones and shit. If you were at a protest and you were detained and they took your phone, are you going to keep that phone after? Maybe not. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you shouldn't. Thinking of casual conversation. It's easy to get comfortable and to forget when you're talking to people and you're vibing that seemingly harmless discussions could be overheard, or this could be someone that you literally don't know enough or have enough information about, or someone's status in terms of their risk could change later on, and the information that you share with them then could be that much more risky based on how their legal or mental status shifted or changed over time. And so communication practices can be really important. And some of the things you might want to avoid is don't say things like, we're planning a big action next week, we're meeting at this location, thinking of casual conversation. It's easy to get comfortable and to forget when you're talking to people and you're vibing that seemingly harmless discussions could be overheard, or this could be someone that you literally don't know enough or have enough information about, or someone's status in terms of their risk could change later on, and the information that you share with them then could be that much more risky based on how their legal or mental status shifted or changed over time. And so communication practices can be really important. Some alternative practices that you can like utilize in this situation is, if you need to talk about sensitive topics, consider talking about them sparingly through secure encrypted messaging platforms like Signal. And even beyond that, it probably is better for if you're talking about really sensitive things, to do it in person without technology around and around people that you trust and know aren't keeping that information and sharing it with people that they shouldn't be sharing it with. If you need to talk about sensitive things, can you talk about it in a way where there's no form of documentation of it? Next is digital hygiene. So what are the variety of practices, tools, and modes that you can operate in that help you protect your digital life, the digital information you have, and the digital connections that your devices will draw between you and other folks in the movement? And so digital hygiene can be using encrypted communication tools, strong passwords, and secure devices to protect your information. And this matters because in the digital age, everything can be surveyed, everything can be hacked. This is also up with the understanding that, yes, we have forms of securing our devices or encryption or certain kind of understandings of what kind of passwords make it more difficult for the state to survey us, but the state is always ramping their tools up and up and up. So it's important for us to not just have one mode or set of action or set of tools. It's important for us to reassess those tools and adjust them accordingly based on literally the skills and tools that the state has. Emails, phone calls, text messages, none of these forms of communication are inherently secure.
How the police can unlock your phone without a password. The police use advanced forensic tools like Cellebrite and Grey Key to bypass phone security and get full access to your data. Grey Key is particularly powerful. It can crack passwords and unlock both Android and iPhones, even if the device is encrypted. Cellebrite, on the other hand, is capable of extracting deleted messages, call logs, photos, and app data from platforms such as WhatsApp. And once they've extracted that data, it's organized in a way that makes it easy for investigators to go through, just like scrolling through your phone. Even if the police can't unlock your phone, they can still access cloud backups on iCloud and Google Drive, giving them access to messages, photos, and files without needing your device. Now, if the police ask for your passcode, you do not have to give it. But under the RIPPER Act, they can issue a Section 49 notice, which legally requires you to hand it over. Refusing to comply can result in up to 2 years in prison, or even 5 years if the case is serious.
And they can be handed over to the state if they can physically get your device and it's not as secure as it could be. They can get it through a subpoena to your phone company, to your internet company. The practices that you have to protect your digital life can be vital, especially when you're facing increased repression. And you might be tightening up your security culture in the short term, but what about all the things you've been working on in the past and whether or not that is as identifiable or not as it could be? It shouldn't. Some of the things that you can do: encrypted messaging apps like Signal that offer encrypted communications. Both Signal is a platform that offers end-to-end encryption, meaning only you and the recipient can read your messages. So I want to be a little bit more clear here about Signal and really break down why encrypted communications is so important. And there's a few different things that I want to explain. Is just to explain a little bit about what end-to-end encryption actually is. End-to-end encryption is by default. So it's only you and your contact can read the messages, not Signal, not the government, not your phone provider. Signal also collects almost nothing. If subpoenaed, Signal can turn over the data you registered, and the last time you connected, that's it. Like the police can unlock your device and they try to use those other softwares to access it. And also it's important that when we're looking at encrypted tech and what kinds of services or software we want to dig into, it's important to look at their legal history. Do they have a history of capitulating to subpoenas? Are they encrypted enough? Do they have ethics around privacy, accepting extradited political prisoners from places like the US? All of these things are going to be helpful for you to figure out if a piece of tech or technology is comforting or not. And I want to read a few different examples of when Signal went toe-to-toe with different state structures in order to protect people's privacy. In 2016, Signal received a subpoena from a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia requesting user data due to Signal's design, which minimizes data retention. The company could only provide the date and time the user registered with Signal and the last time the user connected to Signal's servers. And this is why all of the different things that people recommend you do for Signal, setting disappearing messages, making sure your username isn't like super tied to your government name, being clear about who you're vouching for in terms of the different chats you're in. I want to pull up an article that came out 10 months ago from The Guardian, and it's titled "Encryption is Deeply Threatening to Power." Meredith Whitaker of messaging app Signal says, president of the Signal Foundation says, Surveillance, she says, was a disease from the very beginning of the internet, and encryption is deeply threatening to the kind of power that constitutes itself via these information asymmetries. All of which means that she doesn't expect the fight to end anytime soon. Quote, I don't think these arguments are in good faith. There's a deeper tension here because in 20 years of the development of this metastic tech industry, we've seen every aspect of our lives become subject to mass surveillance perpetrated by a handful of companies partnering with the US government and other Five Eyes agencies to gather more surveillance data about us than has ever been available to any entity in human history. Quote, so if we don't continue to guard these little carve-outs of privacy and ultimately extend them, we have to throw some elbows to get more space here. I think we're in for a much bleaker future than we would be if we can hold this ground and we can expand the space for privacy and free communication. And all of this is to once again bring us back to it's not the tools that you use, it's the research you do on the tools, the ethics of the people behind these tools, and how you use them. Don't screenshot chats and be sharing it around on the internet. And if you're in group chats, ask or initiate a process of people vetting new folks that are being brought in. Because if we know anything about Signal and what has happened in the government lately, even the people in our government are using Signal in the US to talk about war plans. Oh, okay, back to the video. Signal is only safe as your habits. So some of the things that you can do in important chats where sensitive information is being talked about or shared, set disappearing messages. If someone gets access to your phone, then they can't find months worth of chat logs. Maybe they can only find chat logs from the last 7 days. And you can do this by going to the chat, going up into the corner, and then going on disappearing messages, and then choosing accordingly how quickly you want the messages to disappear. Another thing that you can do is that if your phone is lost, you can lock Signal with a PIN. So someone who doesn't have that PIN can't even access your Signal at all. Using code names and only sharing need-to-know information is periodically clear your message history. Do you have chats and messages from last year or the year before, from previous actions? You should not have that on your phone. You should do like a quarterly or a monthly Signal scrub. And then vet folks that are added into group chats. Before someone is added or before you add someone, ask folks, hey, is it okay for me to add this person? What's the vouching process? Maybe establish a vouching process. Or if you're joining a chat with large amounts of people, engage in it accordingly and don't share sensitive information about yourself. Or maybe just be careful about joining chats where people aren't vouched at all. Another thing that you can help with your digital hygiene is having strong and unique passwords. Not only should you have strong and unique passwords, meaning like, I think I did a training recently where they said like if a password has like 10 or more digits based on like the technology that the state has right now, it can take them up to 26 years to crack that password as opposed to like a 4-digit password, which can take them like 4 hours. So one, there are websites and programs that can help you create secure passwords. And then it's also important to figure out how you secure your passwords. Using Google Password Manager isn't going to be the best thing because Google can be subpoenaed and they can just hand that information over, as opposed to other password managers like LastPass or other more secure places where you can house your passwords on LastPass potentially, and be sure to change your master password on a regular basis. Check if any of your information or your emails have been breached. If they have, change your passwords. And this can also include like your Wi-Fi password. It's recommended that you change your Wi-Fi password every couple of weeks. Have you done that? Regular software updates. For any of your tech, it's going to be important to do regular software updates because they're going to debug things and include things that make your technology more secure, especially if you're on a phone, if you're on a particular platform that's helping you keep your more spicy communications more private. Because a lot of the things with encrypting is either you want it to be totally secure or you want to make it fucking difficult for the state to get into that device because they'll be like, fuck, it took us 5 months to get into this phone. Maybe we'll just give up. That happens. That happens in cases. So encrypt your devices, make them more secure. And there are a variety of ways that you can do this. You can have full disk encryption on your computer. And then with different programs or logins that you can have 2-factor authentication enabled for your most important accounts. It may be a little inconvenient, but it's one of the best ways that you can kind of put a hurdle between you and state surveillance. Make a checklist of things that you want to do on a regular basis, and then a checklist of things that you want to do on a quarterly basis. And these practices aren't meant to be extra or to scare you. They're meant to be foundational and things that you practice and build habits out of, so that instead of using your VPN, like keeping on the same location all the time, you change your location every couple of days on your VPN. Like things like that. Habits that you can do on a regular basis that you practice that will save you over time. Now that we have talked about the risk assessment steps that you can take, now that we've talked about the risk assessments you can take and different communication practices that you can have, let's move on to what I consider to be step 3 of security culture, which is how do you deal with repression and active surveillance once the movement really starts heating up. When the state tries to break you with indictments, raids, or surveillance vans at your door, security culture is how we say, not today. It's not just caution, it's resistance. The Weather Underground knew this. Hunted by the FBI, they built a network of trust, went underground, and kept organizing in secret. Not because they were afraid, but because they refused to be silenced. When repression comes, security culture isn't just useful, it's how we keep fighting.
Values. But the system comes down against us because our values are a threat or a challenge or a different set of values in the values on which these institutions are structured.
Our paranoia was no match for what they were really doing. In our wildest imaginations, we thought, oh, they're too sophisticated to actually sit down in a meeting at the highest levels and figure out how to destroy us. This is all just sort of happening at a local level and so on and so forth. And I think that we really didn't realize, we really absolutely did not realize how extensive and coordinated and directed the program was to try and undermine us.
We didn't know at the time, of course, about COINTELPRO, and we didn't really know that there was an FBI strategy to disrupt by harassment arrests and constant disruption and constant disinformation and constant creating of divisions and constant court appearances and trials and meetings with lawyers. But we felt it. We experienced it.
We received an anonymous phone call from a tipster who stated that he was calling us from inside the U.S. Department of Justice and that our office was going to be raided. That night, we got a phone call saying the fire department is on its way. And before we could even say, who is this? They said, get out of the building's on fire, and they hung up. And there were hook and ladder trucks lined up all around the block. And they were putting the 3-story ladders up against the building, and we said, the building's not on fire. There's no fire here. And they said, well, we have to come in and see for ourselves.
Security culture isn't just about encryption or group etiquette. It's also about how people individually and collectively react when the state decides to cross the line and resort to repression, detainment, incarceration, doxing, whatever it may be. It not only trains us for before and during the action, it trains us for after. If someone in your collective is detained, do they know the basics of how they should or shouldn't interact with the police? Are they going to understand why police are asking the kinds of questions that they are? And have they set the practices in place to not have information or resources that can be incriminating towards them or the collective? And then we also have to take considerations into what is the legal strategy based on the evidence that the state does or doesn't have. And this is necessary because movements that challenge state power experience state violence. They experience raids, repression, doxing, trumped up charges, the loss of your house, your jobs, social connections. And this can lead to isolation, which makes people much more susceptible to the state's manipulation and the state's whims. And it might also lead to more informants being funneled into the movement as well. And one of the clearest examples of this that we can see in the recent years is with the Stop Cop City movement out of Georgia. The Stop Cop City movement is a proposed $90 million training facility compound slated to be built in Weelaunee Forest, a site with deep indigenous and Black histories. In response, a multiracial coalition of abolitionists, environmental defenders, students, and faith leaders began organizing to stop Cop City around 2012. 2021. While this movement was powerful and had autonomous organizing, decentralized tactics, cross-movement support, the efficacy of the movement very clearly made it a target in the state's eyes. And so we're going to talk about a little bit of how the state built their case, the different modes of surveillance that they resorted to, and how this panned out. Because I think it's important to not only bring forward case studies, but look at real-life examples to help us situate how people are reacting in movements nowadays.
Activists with Atlanta's Stop Cop City movement gathered to honor one of their own. It had been 6 months since officers killed Manuel Esteban Pais Terán, known as Tortuguita. The 26-year-old environmental activist was part of a movement to stop a police training center from being built in a city forest. Protesters call it Cop City.
The vigil for Tortuguita was about to start, and a couple dozen police officers just showed up, telling people they have to leave the park by tonight.
Yeah, the park closed at 11, and everybody got to leave out at 11.
In the months before Tortuguita's killing, authorities in Georgia launched a crackdown on the movement, characterizing it as a violent extremist organization. And in September, 61 people were charged in a wide-ranging racketeering case and accused of conspiring to stop the construction of the training center.
The defendants are members of Defend the Atlanta Forest, an anarchist, anti-police, and anti-business extremist organization.
Most of them are also facing state domestic terrorism charges, the first such cases in Georgia's history.
The state repression, the crackdown on even lawful political activities is so severe. That is unprecedented.
That means any person moving forward that dissents in any way, just sleeping in a hammock, now you're a terrorist and your life is over.
Stop Cop City is an interesting movement for me to think about because I can say over the years I've known a number of comrades that were a part of that movement, and it was interesting to see from afar how the repression showed up and how deep the repression was, I think, in so many different ways. Since the movement was so strong and effective and was able to postpone Stop Cop City for so long, you really got to see that the movement had many different arms and parts and really did have a lot of community support, which I think is why the cops were so vitriolic and hateful and really targeted people and tried to detain them in ways that were totally unsafe, as we can very much say, because during the Stop Cop City movement, an activist known as Tortuguita was murdered by local police. And this was something that really shaped the movement and has been a point of remembrance for a lot of far leftists, especially in environmental spaces. So I just want to hold a moment to acknowledge Tortuguita's murder at the hands of the state. And also note that in a previous video, when I brought Tortuguita up, I did use he, him pronouns, and Tortuguita goes by they, them pronouns. To give a little bit of context about the Stop Cop City movement, I want to pull up one or two articles right now. This one is called Lawsuit Accuses Atlanta Police of Illegally Targeting Stop Cop City Protesters. And this article goes on to read, Atlanta police have for years illegally targeted critics of a police and firefighter training center, according to a federal lawsuit filed on behalf of a protester who is one of dozens of Stop Cop City activists facing domestic terrorism and racketeering charges. The lawsuit filed on behalf of Jamie Parascano alleges that authorities view any critic of the training center as a would-be criminal and have repeatedly made arrests without cause, depriving protesters of their First Amendment rights and their civil rights protections against false arrest and malicious prosecution. The long-brewing controversy over the training center erupted in January 2023 after state troopers who were part of the sweep of the South River Forest killed an activist, Tortuguita, who authorities said had fired at them. Numerous protests ensued, with masked vandals attacking. Numerous protests ensued. It reads, internal Atlanta police records reveal monitoring of Cop City opponents' political activities. In August 2023, Atlanta indicted 61 people on racketeering charges related to years-long opposition to the Stop Cop City project. Protests have involved marches, civil disobedience, occupation of public land, and at times property damage and conflict with police, including the police killing of a demonstrator in January 2023. but observers have routinely criticized the indictment for targeting activist ideologies and nonviolent political strategies. The activities in the department's intelligence files include canvassing and signature collection, handing out flyers, hosting town halls, and so on. Targeting people for such First Amendment protected activity can chill freedom of speech, and in this case, it supports questionable, politicized criminal indictments. 76 intelligence reports assembled by the department's Homeland Security Unit compile events between September 2021 and January 2023. The reports contain details of 155 events, over 2/3 of them organized by participants in the Stop Cop City movement. The reports include information about likes and comments on posts, as well as material about other events held by organizers. Atlanta police have also closely watched defund the Atlanta Forest, a key player in the movement, monitoring 91 of their events during this period. Of the 45 groups organizing monitored events, police noted that prior events of only 2 organizers involved civil disobedience or arrest. And it goes on to say, while it is true that social media monitoring may help police allocate officers to maintain public safety, Atlanta's police surveillance far exceeds any such need in many cases, instead serving to keep tabs on citizens that the department views as political opponents. For instance, one monitored group hosted a community conversation about education, neighborhood safety, health, and the Stop Cop City movement. An intelligence report about the evening noted that the group had hosted prior canvassing events and other peaceful events. Another monitored event, a pizza night at a local business, was held by the group Women on the Rise and involved a moment to reflect on community safety. Past events organized by the group were similarly peaceful. Prior events by the host of a study group to discuss abortion politics, also the subject of an intelligence report, were logged as peaceful too. And I'll read from this other article that is titled The Criminalization of Solidarity, the Stop Cop City Prosecutions. And this article reads, the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, a jail support network established in 2016, was prepared to coordinate bail and legal representation for detained protesters and to notify their families and workplaces in the events of their arrests. Its organizers were taking a big risk too. In late May 2023, a SWAT team broke down the door of Solidarity Fund's office, seized its records and electronics, and arrested 3 of the fund's organizers. They are now defendants in the RICO indictment, which charges them with money laundering and charity fraud for their organizational support of Cop City protesters. The raid and indictment made the Solidarity Fund's partners organizations afraid to work with the group, and as a result, its citywide mutual aid programs collapsed, interrupting food access for hundreds of families. When a separate group of activists launched a campaign to put the future of Cop City to referendum vote, the Solidarity Fund heard concerns from numerous groups that merely signing the petition could expose them to legal risk. The quote reads, my speculation is that the authorities understand that their political objective is to discourage a political movement, said Marion Kotz, an indicted Solidarity Fund organizer. The goal effectively requires targeting not only protesters, but organizations such as civil liberties groups and bail funds that empower protesters to carry on in the face of intimidation, brutality, and aggressive prosecution. It's an attempt, according to Kotz, to create a blueprint that can be applied to solve the problem of social movements as a political force in the U.S. What is ultimately at stake, he said, is the notion of solidarity within a broader movement. And I read all of these things to show you in clear detail that even if you are doing nothing wrong, the state could still survey you. Even if you are doing nothing wrong, the state can build a case against you and try to incriminate you. Even if you are raising funds to support people that are experiencing state violence, that are being detained, that are being arrested, that are facing trumped-up charges. Stop Cop City and the racketeering charges and the way that people were surveyed, the way that police searched their trash cans, the way that certain cameras were set up in certain neighborhoods to survey activists. That this shows that we need to be careful in how we do the work that we do, who is aware of the work that we do, and how that work shows up in a traceable and trackable level. Not because we're necessarily doing things wrong or because we're planning things that the state should be aware of. It's literally because the state gets to define and change the chessboard whenever they want based on what their whims are. If the public is building a legitimate campaign to oppose a facility that has both environmental, social, and political risks to the community, should the state and the government not listen? Or instead, will it use more and more and more force to the point of murdering someone to stop a movement. It will. And that's why these case studies are important, because this is a recent history. This involves people that you may know through a variety of degrees of separation, and that fact alone shows that the state can affect us all if they affect one of us. Some of the modes that they used to resist this repression were among the following: mutual aid and jail support networks. Organizers rapidly mobilized to provide bail funds, court support, and emergency housing for targeted activists. And I remember around this time, like, people would be traveling around the country to talk about Stop Cop City. They would have people that were trained in media who were or weren't defendants to go around the country and talk to different movements and spaces to spread the word. Legal defense infrastructure, groups like the Atlanta Solidarity Fund offered legal aid and educated protesters about their rights before and after the arrests. Digital security shifts. After the arrests were linked to Venmo transactions, activists began reassessing their online footprints. And I can even say last year when I was doing legal support work, something that we really tried to be careful of was understanding the Stop Cop City case and the racketeering charges, and trying to be very specific about the language as to why funds were being raised for local legal support and jail support efforts. And then moving on to another major case study around repression and how folks responded from the last few years is we have J20. If you don't remember J20, it was the protest that happened against Trump's inauguration in 2017. To give you a little bit of context, on August 20th, 2017, the day that Trump was sworn into office, activists across the US and world took to the streets to resist Trump's presidency. One of the largest mobilizations happened in Washington, D.C. under the banner of Disrupt J20. There were marches, teach-ins, and blockades, a variety of tactics. Some parts of the movement were peaceful, some parts of it were not. A big part of the reason that so many people were arrested was because the police resorted to a crowd control tactic known as kettling, which is when the police basically enclose you on all sides. They restrict your ability to get in and out. And from the police's perspective, it's to stop the crowd from moving and to de-escalate. But from a lot of movements' perspectives, it's literally to force people to need to get out of the kettle, which is the state basically escalating a situation instead of actually just letting people leave. Like, why are you kettling people and keeping them there for hours and making people pee and shit on the ground, and people are getting angry? And what if they don't have water? What if they don't have access to medicine? 230 people were kettled. Police arrested medics, journalists, legal observers, bystanders. Basically, if you were wearing black or had goggles because you didn't want to have tear gas in your eyes, you could be arrested. And the Department of Justice charged over 200 people with felony riot charges, carrying up to 75 years in prison for some, based on the charges that they had.
Indication of why certain groups especially need to organize right now, because you can't depend on the state to protect you or keep you safe, especially when the head of state is someone who, you know, apparently really enjoys bragging about sexually assaulting women. You know, like, clearly these groups are at ends with the government right now and are not being protected by them, like quite the opposite. So you need to organize in order to, you know, keep ourselves safe. Yeah, so there's been a lot of just morally repugnant things that the state has done, which really highlights like how they're more interested in convictions really than they are like whatever their conception of justice may be, you know. Like, they really just want to make an example out of us. And I think that's pretty clear from the new indictment, which has just these insane and outlandish kind of charges, you know. Instead, they're just focusing all of their weight on us, which I think really goes to show you how the state isn't concerned with violence or protecting people. They're interested in protecting certain people's interests, and they're interested in protecting property, but that's about it. A lot of defendants who are doing really good work and like putting in a lot of effort right now, which is hard because a lot of us, you know, have other commitments that we need to stick to. But the defendants are all organizing. We also have many people who have stepped up in support roles, which we cannot thank enough, and have been really important in turning this into something that we think is a good collective like defense and working group. So we have, you know, calls and conversations like on a daily and like weekly basis, both in smaller circles and at a larger level. So we're doing a lot of work surrounding like legal strategies, also doing a lot of just like emotional support, stuff like that for defendants, because it is a really emotional experience to go through. And we also have, like some different campaigns that are being orchestrated by organizers right now outside of the group, which are really helpful, and we're hoping will have a big impact on the case for the better.
The police testimony in each trial was given additional power with the ostensibly thorough testimony of lead detective Gregory Pemberton, who claimed to have watched hundreds of hours of video hundreds of times and to have personally tracked individuals by the items they wore or carried. This testimony was delivered through multimedia presentations, including videos, still images from the videos presented on poster boards, and interactive PowerPoint presentations the jury would be able to view during deliberations. All those attempts at persuading the jury failed, as no defendant who went to trial was convicted of any charge. Some jurors commented after delivering their verdicts that the prosecutors had not been able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the individuals they alleged were the defendants were in fact the people sitting in front of the jury. Also telling was the surreptitiously recorded video that the prosecution was relying on to establish their conspiracy charge did not convince jurors that there was anything more than political organizing going on. This video is a crucial part of the state's case crumbling. The video was recorded by one of several Project Veritas undercover operatives who had been infiltrating Disrupt J20 and other anti-inauguration protest planning meetings to discredit and expose organizers. Project Veritas is known for these operations and much discredited for their unethical and often outrageous pursuits of their far-right political agenda. Kirchhoff repeatedly represented to the court this video was being shown in its entirety, and it was the only one MPD had received. Pemberton testified that the video had not been doctored. Although under cross-examination during the first trial, he admitted that he had combined 3 files to play as one continuous video and had also edited out the undercover operative when he was visible in a mirror. But that was it. The prosecution maintained this story until pre-trial motions for up-and-coming trial blocks were heard in one courtroom while the May 14th trial was underway in another. These motions forced the prosecution to admit the facts that exposed their hiding of evidence in violation of the Brady obligation. Turns out they had also edited out a conversation that the undercover operative had had with an unwitting activist about how the leaders didn't know anything about the upper echelon stuff, which seemed to mean violence or property destruction. The statement clearly was not advantageous to the state's claim that the video established the conspiracy to riot and commit property destruction. What's more, the prosecution had to admit that they had an additional 69 recordings. 69 recordings. Like, I literally read this and I'm like, what the fuck? So the state can survey, hide evidence, lie about evidence, misconstrue evidence, put in people that are trying to instigate violence and edit out their own part and then use it to prosecute people, use it to start trials against folks for weeks and weeks and weeks, costing people tens of thousands of dollars, changing their lives, changing their emotional state, deregulating people. That's what repression is supposed to do from the state's perspective. But it's fucking ridiculous that they claim due process, that they claim that they're doing the right thing, that they claim they care about property damage, when literally you've been there from the start trying to entrap people. So make it make sense. Make it make sense. Like, conservatives will be like, well, they shouldn't have done this and done that. I'm like, cops lie, they sexually assault people, they beat their partners, they fucking hide evidence. And we're supposed to trust the state to go after protesters and social justice movements? So the corrupt state is who gets to determine what justice is. Like, fuck it. And there's so many things to unpack from J20. At the time, I considered going. I didn't go. And I'm not even saying like I'm glad I did or didn't go, but it's just so wild to look at your past and your movement history and be like, I could have been 20 different decisions away from being a defendant. Now, years later, having done legal support and jail support work, I look back at the glimmers of what I was learning from folks around me, and I'm appreciative that I cared enough to pay attention then and that I'm still involved in this work. This is why there probably wasn't the same kind of disruptions this time around with the inauguration that happened earlier this year. So you can even look at it in that sense of like, these past instances of repression are informing how people are reacting to the movements and happenings of right now. I read this stuff and it just pisses me off. It just pisses me off because I'm just like, the state can do whatever. Like, look at what Trump's administration. Look at all the charges that they sidestep. Look at all the ways where it's like, they're like, I'm in the office, you can't charge me. So I'm like, you're rich. You get to be president and sexually assault people and not pay taxes and lie. And finally, we're at the end of part 1 of the security culture theory. And what I want to remind folks is that this is a primer. It's a beginning introduction to all of these ideas. There are plenty more things that we can talk about in terms of the tools of the state, specific things that you can do based on the modes of organizing that you're doing. There are ways that we can look at history. But this video is a primer, and it should be an educational resource. This should be an opportunity for you to dig into the bits of this that you want to learn more about, and to bring these conversations and questions to your community. And here are some questions you can ask the folks around you. Have we assessed our risk level recently? How has our individual and collective risk level changed? Has there been any changes to how law enforcement or our local governmental officials are talking about protesting? Are there people around us that have been doxxed? Is our digital hygiene up to par? And if it's not, what are the steps that we can take to improve it? And I really want to ground us once again in the fact that security culture is not getting a bunch of tools, putting them on your devices or things once, applying a set of rules or customs or norms to your collective or group, and not reassessing it for like 6 months to a year. Assess it when the way that the state act changes, assess it when there's a breach of trust within your collective or group, and assess it when things for you on an individual level begin to change. And I think we need to be careful about how we deal with conflict, who we talk to about it, because the more information that the state has, the more they can potentially use that information to sow dissent in a movement. And that is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, how accountability, I think, is one of the contemporary ways that we can both help ourselves and hurt ourselves. Meaning, like, I think people want to do the right thing in movement spaces, but if you don't want to do the right thing for the right reasons, you can open up that entire movement to state fuckery. And people don't deserve that. Stay tuned for the next videos in this series. There's going to be a little outro message after this. If you liked this video, go into the comments and let me know what new things you learned. And as I've said in other videos, don't say anything in the comments that you don't want the state to know. Like I read some of these comments and I'm like, oh my God, bitch. I didn't want to end up in a court case because they're reading my comments and they're like, oh, that's interesting. Be careful. Security culture isn't just tools or tech. It's how we survive state violence together. It's how we build movements that aren't easily shattered by surveillance, fear, or infiltration. Whether you're a frontline organizer or just starting out, learning these practices means you're learning to protect something sacred, each other. But to really understand why this matters and how far the state will go to shut us down, we need to look deeper. In part 2 of this security culture series, as a part of the Direct Action 101 series, we're going into the long history of repression in this country, from the Underground Railroad to FBI's COINTELPRO, to how cops use pain compliance and digital surveillance to build criminal conspiracy cases. We'll break down the tools of the state. If you've ever wondered how the state watches us, why some movements get crushed, and what we can do to resist smarter, this next video is for you. So hit the subscribe button, share this with your crew, and I'll see you in part 2. Security culture take 2.
Seriously, if you aren't even thinking about security culture, you should. Because the state wants to fucking capture people that care about justice because they're evil, they're money hungry, they're fat cats.